The night air was thick with the scent of asphalt and fading summer heat as Emily slid out of her car, reaching for her bag. But just as she turned to close the door, something stirred inside. Three pairs of glowing eyes locked onto hers, wide and unblinking. Three tiny kittens sat huddled together on the passenger seat, their fur ruffled and matted, their frail bodies trembling. Emily's breath hitched. How had they gotten in? Where was their mother? She swallowed hard and reached for her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed. Jack, I need help. They won't leave. And deep down she knew it wasn't just about them refusing to leave. Something was keeping them there. When I got Emily's call, I could hear the strain in her voice, half worried, half baffled. It wasn't every day that three stray kittens took over your car and refused to budge. I grabbed my keys and drove over, my mind racing with questions. Had their mother abandoned them? Were they sick? Or was there something else, something we hadn't considered? By the time I pulled up outside Emily's apartment, she was crouched by the open car door, staring at the kittens like they held a secret she couldn't unlock. Milo, the boldest of the three, perched on the seat like he owned the place, his little tail flicking defiantly. Luna pressed herself into the corner, her ears twitching at every sound, ready to run but unwilling to leave. And Theo, the smallest, lay curled up between them, breathing shallowly, as if the weight of the world rested on his tiny shoulders. They won't leave, Emily murmured when I stepped closer. I tried to pick them up, but they just squirmed back inside. It's like they're waiting for something. I leaned down, watching them closely. They weren't just scared, they were anchored to this spot, as if this car held some invisible thread tying them to it. I reached out, and Milo let out a sharp, warning meow. That's when I noticed something, tiny claw marks on the dashboard, and a faint, lingering smell that made my stomach drop. Something had happened here, and we were about to find out what. I exchanged a glance with Emily, then reached out again, slowly this time. Milo tensed but didn't swat at me. Instead, his tiny body shivered, his gaze flicking to the dashboard, then back to me. Something about their behavior felt deliberate. They weren't just hiding, they were guarding something. I glanced at Emily. You sure this is just your car? You didn't borrow it from someone else? She frowned. No. I mean, my dad used it a few months ago, but it's been mine since I moved here. I ran my hand over the seat, feeling for anything out of place. That faint scent again, something musky, feral. It wasn't just the kittens. Something older lingered in the fabric, then a weak cry. Not from the three kittens, but from somewhere deeper in the car. Emily and I froze. Theo's ears perked, his frail body struggling to stand. Luna let out a soft, urgent meow. Milo turned toward the dashboard, eyes locked on something unseen. My chest tightened. I followed their gaze, toward the narrow gap beneath the glove compartment, the dark space barely big enough for a newborn. I reached out, heart pounding. My fingertips brushed against something warm, something alive. Jack? Emily's voice was barely a whisper. I sucked in a breath and carefully pulled back. A tiny, barely moving kitten rested in my palm, its fur cold, its breaths uneven. It had been hidden there, forgotten, alone, until now. The kitten in my hand barely moved, its tiny chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. It was smaller than the others, weak, fragile, a ghost of a survivor. My mind raced. How long had it been trapped in there? How had it even survived this long? Emily covered her mouth. Oh my God, it was in the car this whole time? The three kittens shifted closer, their small bodies pressing against my arm, as if urging me to do something. They hadn't just been hiding in the car. They had been waiting for us to find their sibling. I cupped the frail little thing in my hands, feeling the cold seep through its thin fur. We need to warm it up, now. Emily scrambled inside, returning with a towel while I gently wrapped the kitten, rubbing its body to bring some heat back. It let out a faint, raspy mew, barely audible, but it was enough. It was still fighting. Daniel's truck rumbled up the driveway just as I stood, cradling the kitten. He hopped out, his expression shifting from confusion to concern the moment he saw my face. What the hell happened? I exhaled sharply. We just found this one trapped under the dashboard, barely breathing. His eyes flicked to the kitten still in the car. He shook his head. That means the mother was in here too. If she was desperate enough to hide them inside a car, something must have scared her off. His words sent a chill through me. If their mother had abandoned them, what had driven her away? Emily knelt beside me, her fingers hovering over the tiny kitten wrapped in the towel. Is it going to make it? Her voice was barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure. Its breaths were faint, its body too cold. But I wasn't about to say that out loud. We need to get it warm and hydrated. It has a chance. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. This doesn't sit right with me. A mother cat wouldn't just abandon her kittens like this. He glanced around the parking lot, eyes scanning the shadows. Something happened here. Emily bit her lip, looking back at the car. Do you think she's still around? Maybe she's hurt? I stood up, adjusting my grip on the kitten. It's possible, but if she's alive, she's either too scared to come back or she can't. The weight of that reality settled over us. Milo let out a soft meow from inside the car, his little head peeking over the console. The other two stayed close, huddled together like they were still waiting. They didn't want to leave. They didn't feel safe. Daniel sighed. We need to check the area. If she's nearby, we might have a shot at reuniting them. If not... He didn't finish the sentence, but we all knew what it meant. Emily squared her shoulders. Then we do whatever it takes to keep them alive. I nodded. Let's find out what really happened. We started searching immediately. Emily took the front of the complex, peering under parked cars and checking the bushes near the sidewalk. Daniel headed toward the alley, flashlight sweeping over dumpsters and old wooden fences. I stayed near the car, watching the kittens for any sign of recognition, any reaction that might tell me we were close. Milo, Luna, and Theo huddled on the seat, their ears twitching at the distant sounds of the city. But they weren't looking toward the alley or the sidewalk. Their eyes were locked onto something else, the dark space beneath Emily's car. A chill ran through me. Daniel, over here. He jogged back, and I knelt down, lowering the flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows, illuminating something that made my breath catch. Fur. Matted, barely moving, a mother cat. She was wedged against the undercarriage, her body limp, one paw stretched toward the edge as if she'd tried to reach her kittens before collapsing. Damn it, Daniel muttered. She's alive, but just barely. Emily let out a soft gasp as she knelt beside me. She must have hidden them in the car, then got hurt before she could come back for them. I reached out carefully, my heart hammering. If she was injured too badly, we didn't have much time. The kittens let out desperate mews, sensing their mother nearby. We needed to get her out. Fast! I inched closer, my hands steady, but my heart pounding. The mother cat barely reacted, her shallow breaths the only sign she was still alive. Her fur was tangled with grime, and when I reached out, my fingers brushed against something sticky. Blood. Emily's voice shook. She's hurt bad. What do we do? Daniel exhaled sharply. If we move her wrong, we could make it worse. But if we leave her here, he didn't need to finish. She wouldn't survive. Milo, Luna, and Theo pressed against the car door, letting out desperate mews. They had been waiting for her all this time. I couldn't let this end here. I swallowed hard. We don't have a choice. We have to get her out. Emily hesitated, then nodded. I'll get a blanket. We can wrap her up. Daniel ran a hand over his face. And then what? Are we keeping her? Are we even sure she'll make it? I glanced down at the frail body beneath the car, at the kittens still waiting. There was no easy answer, but deep down, I knew one thing. We do everything we can. I took a slow breath and reached under the car, carefully sliding my arms around the mother cat's frail body. She barely stirred, her weight unsettlingly light. Her fur was damp with something sticky, but I didn't stop to check how bad the wound was. We had to move her first. Emily returned with a blanket, spreading it open on the pavement as I gently lifted the cat. Her ribs felt sharp under my fingers, her body limp, except for the faintest twitch of her tail. The moment I set her down, Milo, Luna, and Theo scrambled from the car, their tiny paws barely making a sound as they pressed against their mother's side. She didn't react, but they curled up against her anyway, desperate for warmth, for comfort, for any sign that she was still theirs. Daniel exhaled sharply. She needs a vet, now. Emily nodded, then hesitated. But what if she doesn't make it? What happens to them? I clenched my jaw. We'll figure that out later. Right now she's still breathing, and that's all that matters. Daniel grabbed his keys. I'll call ahead. There's an emergency clinic a few miles from here. As we lifted the blanket-wrapped cat into the car, a sharp gust of wind blew through the lot. The streetlights flickered, and for the first time I noticed just how eerily quiet everything had become. Something still didn't sit right. Had this really just been an accident, or was there more to the story than we realized? Emily drove fast but careful, her fingers gripping the wheel tight. The emergency vet clinic wasn't far, but every second felt too long. In the back seat, I held the mother cat wrapped in the blanket, feeling her shallow breaths against my hands. Milo, Luna, and Theo sat beside me in a small carrier Emily had grabbed from her apartment at the last second. They weren't meowing anymore, just staring through the bars, their tiny faces filled with silent worry. Daniel sat up front, already on the phone with the clinic. "Yeah, she's in bad shape. Looks like possible internal injuries, maybe blood loss. We're 5 minutes out." He listened for a moment, nodding. "Got it. We'll be there." Emily glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "They'll help her, right?" I swallowed, staring down at the fragile cat in my lap. "They'll do what they can." The moment we pulled into the parking lot, the clinic staff was already outside with a stretcher. I carefully transferred the mother cat into their hands, watching as they rushed her inside. The kittens let out soft, confused mews, pressing against the door of the carrier as if they could follow. Emily sighed, leaning against the car. "I can't believe they were just stuck in my car this whole time. If I hadn't noticed them," Daniel shook his head, "they would have died in there." That was the truth neither of us wanted to say out loud. We had saved them just in time, but the real question remained. Why had their mother hidden them in the car in the first place? Inside the clinic, time stretched unbearably. The mother cat had been rushed to the back, leaving us in the waiting room with nothing to do but wait. The only sound breaking the silence was the occasional scratch of tiny claws against the carrier door. Milo, Luna, and Theo sat huddled together, their wide eyes fixed on the direction their mother had been taken. They weren't just anxious, they were waiting for her, expecting her to return, not understanding the uncertainty that hung in the air. Emily sat beside me, arms wrapped tightly around herself. "She has to make it," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "They've been waiting for her this whole time." Her voice wavered, thick with emotion, and I knew she was right. The kittens hadn't left that car because they believed their mother was coming back. Now the only thing standing between them and a life alone was whether or not she survived the night. Daniel returned from the front desk, rubbing a hand over his face. "They're stabilizing her, but it's bad. Blood loss, dehydration, exhaustion. She must have been out there for days before we found her. They'll do everything they can, but—" He trailed off, not needing to say what we were all thinking. Emily swallowed hard, staring at the floor. "And if she doesn't make it?" No one answered. If she didn't survive, the kittens would be orphans. We could care for them, feed them, keep them warm, but none of that would fill the void of losing their mother. They were too young to understand, too small to know that she wasn't coming back if things went wrong. Milo suddenly let out a sharp, insistent cry, startling all of us. It wasn't a random meow, it was a desperate call, one filled with urgency, like he was trying to reach her. We all froze as the room fell into silence. Then, from somewhere beyond the doors that led to the treatment area, a weak, broken cry echoed back. Emily gasped, covering her mouth, her eyes shining with sudden hope. Daniel's gaze met mine, and for the first time all night, I saw a flicker of possibility in his expression. The mother cat was still fighting, but the real question was, did she have the strength to hold on? We all sat frozen for a moment, barely breathing as the mother cat's weak cry faded behind the clinic doors. The kittens perked up instantly, pressing against the bars of their carrier, ears twitching in the direction of their mother's voice. It was the first sign of real hope all night, but it didn't erase the hard truth. We still didn't know if she would make it. Emily turned to me, her expression tense. "What happens if she pulls through? What do we do with them?" She gestured toward the carrier, where Milo, Luna, and Theo remained on high alert. "They can't go back outside, not after everything they've been through." Daniel sighed, leaning back in his chair. "If she makes it, we figure out if she's strong enough to care for them again. If she doesn't—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Either way, we have 3 kittens who need homes." I glanced at the tiny faces staring up at us, oblivious to the weight of the decision hanging in the air. None of us had planned for this. Emily hadn't expected to find kittens in her car. Daniel hadn't expected a late-night rescue, and I hadn't expected to feel this responsible for them. But the moment I saw them waiting in that car, the moment they refused to leave because they were still waiting for their mother, something had shifted. "We can't separate them," I said finally, breaking the silence. "Not yet. They need each other. If their mother makes it, we make sure she's strong enough to care for them. If she doesn't," I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair, "then we do whatever it takes to keep them safe." Emily nodded slowly, as if letting the reality settle in. "So we foster them?" Daniel scoffed. "That's what they all say before they end up keeping them." I didn't answer. Maybe he was right. Maybe I already knew that walking away from them wasn't an option. The waiting stretched on, each passing minute heavy with uncertainty. The clinic was quiet except for the occasional hum of conversation from the front desk, but to us, the silence was deafening. The kittens had settled down in their carrier, but every so often, Milo would let out a small chirp, as if checking to see if his mother would answer again. Emily sat with her knees drawn up to her chest, her fingers absent-mindedly gripping the fabric of her jeans. "I hate this part," she muttered, "just sitting here, not knowing." Daniel leaned back, rubbing his face. "It never gets easier." He was right. Rescue work was full of these moments, the ones where all you could do was wait and hope you'd done enough. But something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the way the kittens had refused to leave the car, their unshakable belief that their mother would come back. Maybe it was the way Emily had found them, like fate had dropped them into her path for a reason. Or maybe it was just the way they were looking at me now, as if I had all the answers when, in reality, I had none. The door to the treatment room finally opened, and we all sat up at once. A vet tech stepped out, holding a clipboard, her expression unreadable. For a split second, my heart stopped. "She's stable," the tech said, and I barely had time to exhale before she continued. "But there's something you need to know." The relief that had started to build evaporated instantly. I exchanged a look with Emily, then Daniel. "What is it?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. The tech hesitated before answering. "We ran a quick scan. She has a microchip." The weight of her words settled over us, and a new kind of uncertainty filled the room. The mother cat wasn't just a stray, she belonged to someone. For a moment, none of us spoke. The words hung heavy in the air, changing everything. The idea that this cat had an owner hadn't even crossed my mind. She had looked like any other stray, thin, desperate, clinging to life. But now, the situation wasn't just about rescuing a struggling mother and her kittens. It was about who she belonged to and what that meant for them. Emily finally broke the silence. "So, she has a home?" Her voice was cautious, hopeful, yet uncertain. The vet tech hesitated. "We don't know yet. The chip is registered, but that doesn't always mean there's someone still looking for her. Some animals go missing for years, and by the time they're found, their owners have moved on. Other times, people—" She paused as if choosing her words carefully. "People abandon them, even when they're chipped." Daniel exhaled through his nose, rubbing his temple. "So we wait again?" The tech gave a small nod. "We've contacted the owner. If they respond, we'll let you know. In the meantime, she needs rest. You can check on her in the morning." Walking out of the clinic, the night felt colder than before, the air thick with tension. The streetlights buzzed overhead, casting long, thin shadows on the pavement. The city felt distant, muffled by the weight of what we had just learned. None of us had been prepared for this. The situation had been so clear before: save the mother, help the kittens, make sure they survived. But now, there was an entirely new layer of uncertainty. Emily hugged herself, staring at the ground. What if the owner wants her back? I didn't answer right away. A few hours ago, we had been strangers to these cats. But now, the thought of handing them over to someone who might not have been searching for them, someone who might have left them behind on purpose, didn't sit right. Daniel caught my expression and scoffed, shaking his head. "You're already too attached." Maybe I was. But as I looked at the kittens curled up in their carrier, their tiny bodies pressed close together, I realized I wasn't the only one. They had already chosen their family. The only question now was whether we'd be forced to break it apart. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. 3 tiny kittens, curled up on Emily's car seat, waiting for something that would never come. I saw their mother, limp and unmoving under the car, her paw outstretched as if she had tried desperately to reach them before she collapsed. I heard the moment Milo had cried out in the clinic, his small voice filled with longing, and the way his mother had answered, weak but unwavering. That sound, that instinct to hold on, wouldn't leave my head. I found myself pacing long before the sun rose, checking my phone every few minutes. No updates. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on me, heavier than before. We had done everything we could. Rescued them, kept them safe, brought them here. But now the final decision wasn't ours to make. A stranger, someone none of us had ever met, held their fate in his hands. Daniel's message finally came just after dawn. Heading to the clinic. No news yet. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys and was out the door before I had time to think twice. By the time I arrived, Emily was already there, sitting in one of the plastic waiting room chairs, clutching a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The dark circles under her eyes told me she hadn't slept either. She looked up the second I walked in. Anything? I shook my head. Nothing. The room felt colder than last night. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee, but it did little to calm the tension curling in my chest. We weren't just waiting for a medical update anymore. We were waiting to find out if all of this had been for nothing. Just then, the vet tech from last night appeared in the doorway. Her face was unreadable, her clipboard held close to her chest. My stomach twisted. The owner responded, she said, her voice neutral. He's coming in today. The words landed like a gut punch. I swallowed hard, but it didn't help. The mother cat had a home, or at least she used to. Emily sat up straighter, fingers tightening around her coffee cup. Did he say anything? Does he still want her? The tech hesitated before answering. He sounded surprised, like he didn't even know she was missing. She glanced toward the back room where the cats were resting. She's doing better, by the way. Still weak, but she's more responsive. The kittens have been calmer knowing she's close. I nodded, but my thoughts were spinning. Surprise. That wasn't the reaction of someone who had been searching, someone who had lost a beloved pet and spent sleepless nights wondering if she was okay. It was the reaction of someone who hadn't even noticed she was gone. My jaw tightened. So what happens now? The tech sighed. Now we wait, and we see if this man is really here to take her home, or if he already gave up on her a long time ago. The waiting room felt colder than before, the air thick with something unspoken. I sat rigid in my chair, fingers clasped together, trying to ignore the growing tension clawing at my chest. Emily hadn't touched her coffee since the vet tech left, just staring down at the cup like it held answers we didn't have. Daniel stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the parking lot. Waiting. It felt like hours before the glass door finally swung open. A man stepped inside, older, maybe in his late 40s, with a stiff posture and an expression that gave nothing away. He wore a button-down shirt, neatly tucked like he had come straight from work. His eyes flicked around the waiting room until they landed on the receptionist, and then he approached the desk without hesitation. I studied him carefully, waiting for something. Concern, regret, anything that showed he cared about the cat he had supposedly lost. But his voice was even, emotionless. I got a call about a cat. Says she was found. Emily shot me a glance, her lips pressing into a tight line. I didn't look away from the man, my gut already twisting. Something was off. The receptionist nodded and gestured toward the back. She's in recovery. The vet will be out in a moment to speak with you. The man barely reacted. He sighed and adjusted the watch on his wrist. Right. I guess I should take care of that. He didn't ask how she was doing. He didn't ask if she had been hurt. My stomach churned. This wasn't someone who had lost a beloved pet. This was someone checking an errand off his list. Daniel must have felt it too because he shifted, his arms tightening across his chest. Emily's fingers curled against the sleeve of her sweater. No one said a word, but the tension was thick enough to drown in. A few minutes later, the vet emerged, holding a folder. She spoke with the man in hushed tones, explaining the cat's condition, how malnourished she was, how she had been found injured, how her kittens had been desperately waiting for her. He nodded along, but it felt absent, like none of it actually mattered to him. Then came the moment I had been dreading. The vet folded her arms, looking him straight in the eye. "Do you want to take her home?" Silence. The man exhaled through his nose, scratching his jaw. Then, with a shrug, he said words that made my blood run cold. "Well, I haven't seen her in months. Figured she ran off. She's probably better off where she is." Emily's breath hitched beside me. Daniel let out a quiet scoff. My fingers clenched so hard my nails dug into my palms. That was it? That was all she was worth to him? The vet nodded once, her face unreadable. "Then we'll make arrangements for her and her kittens." The man didn't argue, didn't fight for her, didn't even ask to see her. He just muttered something about needing to get back to work, turned, and walked out the door. The second it shut behind him, Emily let out a shaky breath. Daniel shook his head, muttering, "Unbelievable." I felt something loosen in my chest. Relief, maybe, or anger, or both. But as I looked at the door, the man had just disappeared through. All I could think was he may have walked away, but she had already found her real home, and we weren't going to let her go. The door had barely shut before the weight of everything settled over us. Emily let out a long breath, rubbing her hands over her face as if trying to shake off the last few minutes. Daniel just stood there, arms still crossed, watching the space where the man had been, shaking his head in quiet disbelief. I didn't feel anything at first. No rush of triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet, sinking feeling, like the world had just confirmed something I already knew. The mother cat had never been missing. She had been abandoned. The realization hit harder than I expected. She had fought so hard to keep her kittens alive, to protect them in whatever way she could, even when her body had been failing her. And the whole time, the person who was supposed to be hers, the one who should have been searching for her, had already moved on. It made me sick. But at the same time, it made something else even clearer. "She's not going anywhere," I murmured, finally breaking the silence. Emily lifted her head, her brows knitting together. "What do you mean?" I looked toward the hallway leading to the recovery room where the mother cat was resting. "She's staying with us, all of them." Daniel snorted, shaking his head. "Knew you were going to say that." Emily's lips parted, her eyes searching mine. "Are you sure?" That's a lot." I didn't even hesitate. "They don't belong anywhere else, not after this." We walked back to the recovery room together, where the mother cat lay curled in a soft blanket, her body still weak but her breathing stronger than before. Her eyes fluttered open when she heard us, and almost instantly the kittens stirred in their carrier, their tiny heads popping up at the sound of her movement. I opened the door and carefully set the carrier down. The moment I unlatched it, Milo was the first to leap out, scrambling toward his mother with a tiny, desperate chirp. Luna and Theo followed, pressing against her as if afraid she would disappear again. But this time, she was here, and she wasn't going anywhere. Emily let out a soft laugh, tears welling in her eyes. They waited for her, and she waited for them. Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess we're fostering, huh?" I glanced down at the small family curled together, finally safe, finally whole. Maybe fostering was the plan. But as I watched them, I had the strangest feeling that they had already chosen us just as much as we had chosen them. And I wasn't going to fight it. Rescue isn't just about saving lives. It's about giving animals the love and security they deserve, especially when the world has failed them. If you've ever considered fostering or adopting, there are countless animals out there waiting for someone to choose them. You could be their second chance. If this story moved you, share it. Help spread awareness about the realities of abandoned animals and the power of second chances. And if you want to follow more rescue stories, make sure to subscribe, because every life saved is a story worth telling.